As a youth that came from the internet age on Earth, Klein quickly understood Miss Magician's idea, how she prepared to do it, and what she was relying on. Isn't this sharing economy? The Tarot Club and the Fool, there's no technological limitation. Miss Magician is usually lazy and doesn't have a strong presence, but I never expected her to have sharp acumen on such matters. It also stems from me requesting to borrow the spellbook. Regardless, to be able to quickly be inspired and set up a business model is pretty good. Klein deliberately made the word jam and sparrow hesitate for a few seconds before saying, I might need it this weekend and next week. He was estimating this based on the time it took Mr. Hanged Man to return from the abyss maelstrom to the Rorsted Sea, while also allocating time for him to stabilize his spirituality and replenish his supply. When the time came, they would join forces to explore the primitive island with many Beyonder creatures. Forrest hurriedly nodded. All right, I will make the arrangements to prevent others from using it. As she heaved a sigh of relief, she requested Mr. Fool that he bear witness for the subsequent rental agreement. After obtaining a confirmation from him, she indicated that she was done with the private communication. Following that, she conjured Lemano's travels and surveyed the table. Everyone, I have here a mystical item. TT has a total of 38 pages. Each page can help the user record Beyonder powers they encounter. They will then be able to release it when needed, but it will be slightly weaker than the original power. Each page can be repeatedly recorded. Each record can only be used once. Amongst them, 3 pages can be used to record demigod-level Beyonder powers, but the chances of success are very low. It might not succeed 1 in 10 times. For simply explain the traits of Lemano's travels and its negative effects. It lit up the eyes of Audrey and company. With them no longer being novices in the domain of mysticism or the Beyonder world, it wasn't difficult for them to tell the value of Miss Magician's notebook without her making it explicit to them. At the same time, they viewed it as a demigod-level artifact. It resembles a shepherd and the creeping hunger. They allow the use of the Beyonder powers from other pathways, but there aren't as many negative effects. There's also a chance to record a demigod power, draw my own blood. Audrey suddenly shrank her hand back in fear as she thought over the matter. As a powerful noble's daughter, she had almost never been injured from a young age. Therefore, she had an extreme fear of pain that remained an unknown to her. Taking the opportunity when Forrest paused, she raised her hand slightly and asked, Miss Magician, how much do you wish to sell it for? Audrey believed that her father, Earl Hall, would also be able to recognize the value of Lemano's travels, so it was certain that she could be reimbursed by him. Therefore, she planned on fully satisfying For's requirement. She must be lacking money recently, or else she wouldn't be selling such an important and useful mystical item. While Audrey thought in pity, she considered whether she should offer to buy it at a premium. Damn it, why can't it be put on sale after I return from the primitive island? Alger had a strong interest in Lemano's travels, but he wasn't able to produce the money or materials needed to purchase this mystical item. £1,300 was money that an ordinary person might not be able to save up even in 10 to 20 years, but compared to an item at the level of Lemano's travels, it was nothing. It's worth at least £10,000. If I encounter Beyonders that are backed by powerful factions, it wouldn't be a problem selling it for more than £30,000. Alger swept his glance at Justice, who was inquiring about the price, as well as Catlia, who had nudged her glasses, looking as though she was planning to join the bid. He couldn't help but sigh. He didn't believe that the transaction would fail according to his wishes, having it left unsold before he returned from the primitive island. Miss Justice has money, and the Hermit has Queen Mystic and the Moses ascetic order. They don't lack money or resources. Sigh. Alger adjusted his seating posture as he looked across the table with a heavy look. Emlyn and Derek were similarly interested in Lemano's travels, but it was simply interest. They knew that they lacked the ability to provide anything in a fair exchange. When she heard Miss Justice's question, Forrest realized that she had forgotten to mention the most crucial point. She hurriedly added, No, it's not for purchase. I'm only renting it. When you need it, you can rent it for a short period which will be witnessed by Mr. Fool. Rent. You can do that. At that moment, everyone except Klein and Derek were surprised. Without a doubt, they knew what a rental transaction was, but they never expected it to be applied to a mystical item, much less have it appear in the Tarot Club. This was apparently very doable. It was relatively useful for every member of the Tarot Club, and it wouldn't cost them much while remaining affordable. Furthermore, Miss Magician could slowly build up quite a sizable fortune by doing so. But in fact, the best result was to record Beyonder power. She could gather different kinds of Beyonder powers from various pathways in this way, making it far more efficient than seeking the chance to record it on her own. Alger quickly realized the key to the rental transaction as he was delighted. He asked, "How much is the rental fee?" Lemano's travels correspond to sequence 6. It's usually about £5,000, but due to its uniqueness, it costs at least £10,000. Fours had built up quite a bit of experience during her time in the Tarot Club, so after some consideration she said, "Each rental basically starts at £300. Every additional day is an additional £50. And when returning it, the notebook needs to have 2 additional pages of Beyonder powers than when it was rented out. If there's only 1 blank page or no blank pages when it's rented, one just needs to fill up the full book. Having 2 additional pages didn't mean 2 additional power. That also meant that they could use any of the Beyonder powers in Lemano's travel. One just needed to make up for it later. There was no need for it to be of the same type, as pages were all that mattered. £50 a day, £1,500 a month. If it's possible, I can keep renting it. Audrey did a simple count of the costs. Alger was thrilled when he heard that, as he said with an unperturbed look, "I plan on renting it for 2 days, but the exact price needs negotiation. It will be adjusted based on what Beyonder powers are recorded in the note." He felt more confident towards his exploration of the primitive island. "When do you plan to rent it?" Fors asked, delighted that she had business right away. "TLL be renting it for 2 days sometime between this weekend to next weekend." "The exact time hasn't been determined," Alger replied without any hesitation. Fors immediately frowned as she said apprehensively, "This period of time has already been reserved for Mr. World. Reserved for the world. When did this happen?" Alger was surprised as he looked at the other end of the long bronze tail. He soon came to a realization that it had been agreed upon during their private communication. Why would they come to such an agreement? Miss Magician doesn't need to have informed him ahead of time. They had other transactions during the private communication. What kind of communications and transactions would they have? Miss Magician had commissioned the assassination of an Aurora Order Oracle. The world had accepted the mission, and one of the traits of the Oracle is the ability to record and use the Beyonder powers of others once. This is identical to Lemano's travels. Does this mean that the world has already succeeded? As such, Miss Magician is indebted to him, and she hadn't fully resolved. Now she came up with this method to pay off the rest. Alger eliminated the possibilities, and finally felt that he had found the truth. Without anyone catching wind of it, the world Jam Sparrow had already hunted an Aurora Order Oracle, an oracle suspected to be a Sequence 5. This secretly made Alger feel alarmed, because he was about to cooperate with the world soon. Thankfully, there's Mr. Fool bearing witness. As a blessed, Jam Sparrow wouldn't violate the agreement he makes in front of a god. Alger consoled himself and retracted his gaze from the world. Meanwhile, Audrey and Catlia had recalled the matter of the Aurora Order Oracle from the transactions involving both Miss Magician and Mr. World, as well as how the Oracle's powers were similar to Lemano's travels. Hence, they believed that the world might have already completed the mission. Renting the spellbook was one of the parts to completing the transaction. Emlyn didn't think about such matters, putting his focus on the unavailability of Lemano's travels this weekend and the following week. In other words, I can borrow it for the next few days. If I have help from this notebook, those 2 primitive believers wouldn't be able to pose a threat. Emlyn looked around and turned anxious as he leisurely said, "Can I rent it for today and tomorrow?" £400 plus 2 pages of Beyonder powers. Fors directly announced the price. Emlyn nodded gently. "Introduce what Beyonder powers are recorded first. If they aren't very useful to me, I wish that the price can be lowered because I'll need to waste time recording powers." Fors flipped through Lemano's travels and began to give a vague introduction. Door opening, black screen, tumble, teleport, lightning strike, float, flight, wind blades. Why are there so many Beyonder powers in the storm domain? The world has used it before. He recorded the Beyonder powers corresponding to See God from Mr. Fool. When I return to the cathedral, I should find out what recently happened in Backlund. That oracle couldn't have died without a trace. As Alger listened, he began thinking of investigating the matter. Authority the Hermit similarly thought of the world Jam Sparrow, from hearing the Beyonder powers, which were recorded in Leymano's travel. I wonder if I can pay a certain price to get the fool to showcase demigod powers of the storm pathway as well as his domain. This will be better than seeking the help of the Moses ascetic order. That will make them know of my possession of Leymano's travels. I should first write to Her Majesty. Perhaps she will come to the future to showcase her powers. Catlia was increasingly convinced that the spellbook had a value that exceeded its level, and was very regretful that Miss Magician was only renting. After hearing the description, Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. This was because the Beyonder powers, like lightning, were very lethal against artificial vampires. Of course, it was the same for Sanguine. Very good. I was still worried about needing to seek the sun's help, and passing Leymano's travels to him to get him to showcase purification powers to be recorded. Emlyn instantly became relaxed as he glanced at Derek beside him while saying to Fours, "Deal." £400 with the recording of a few Beyonder powers was nothing compared to the completion of his mission. I can earn money quickly and also obtain Beyonder powers this way, for suddenly felt that her future was bright as she hurriedly smiled. All right, PLL, get Mr. Fool to transfer it to you after the gathering. Right on the heels of that, she turned to say to Catlia, "Ma'am, the Abraham family's direct descendant has given a reply. Do you wish to communicate privately, or have me directly say it out loud?" Catlia thought and said, "Let's do it privately." Soon the others had their senses blocked as Fours recounted what her teacher said. They don't know much about Mr. Dor either. They only know two things, no three. First, among their ancestors, there is an existence known as Mr. Dor. Second, this ancestor vanished in the War of the Four Emperors. They've been struggling to find him. Third, they will hear ravings that can cause a loss of control during the full moon and blood moon. In addition, they temporarily do not wish to make any direct contact. The third point was added by Fours by herself. She wished that Ma'am Hermit and the Queen Mystic behind her could use this to further understand Mr. Dor's matters. This was beneficial in helping the Abraham escape the fate of being cursed. Mr. Dor is the Abraham family's ancestor, and he vanished in the War of the Four Emperors. He would create ravings during full moons. The latter was confirmed by Mr. Fool, so there's nothing suspicious. That is to say that although Mr. Dor has vanished, he still can affect Beyonders of the same bloodline, as well as living beings that use certain items during the full moon and blood moon. This means that he hasn't completely lost his connection with the real world. This is how the Emperor was able to interact with him. Her Majesty once said that there were members of the Abraham family who worked for the Emperor back then. Catlia had some theories as she gently nodded. "TF, there are any questions, I'll get you to pass them on. TLL, pay the remaining £650 today." With £650, along with Mr. Moon's £400, I've made a profit of £1,050 today. Together with the £730 from before, as well as the sale of the two properties to pay Mr. World, I might still have £1,000 left. My savings are about to exceed £3,000. This way, I'll have the money needed to purchase the other main ingredient for Scrot. I might still have some left over at that moment, for suddenly found herself a little wealthy. This made her consider helping purchase the Interrogator Beyonder characteristic for Zio to make up for the risk she had to endure over Mr. X's assassination. After the blocking of senses was lifted, Fours heard the world Jam and Sparrow speak before she could say a word. "T need a mystical item from the Marauder pathway. It can be at sequence 9 or 8. Catlia considered for a moment and said, "I can ask around for you. However, items of the Marauder pathway aren't common. There might be a premium involved." "No problem." Klein controlled the world to provide the response. He then made his marionette look at the now wealthy Miss Magician. "T want to sell an Interrogator Beyonder characteristic for only £1,000. Typically, this sequence 7 Beyonder characteristic, which could be used as a main ingredient, should have been priced around £1,200, but Klein had 2 sets at the moment. Furthermore, considering how he had used Miss Zio's identity to participate in Mr. X's gathering, there was a certain degree of danger he was bringing to her. Therefore, he gave a slight discount. "It's only £1,000. That's like a sale at a department store. But why does Mr. World know that I want it? He is Mr. Fool's blessed." The Interrogator Beyonder characteristic was in his hands, and he is also aware that I can now afford it, Fours was stunned for 2 seconds as she nearly forgot to reply. During this process, Audrey held back the urge to engage in shopping because she knew that Zio needed the item. 1,000 pounds. Interrogators Beyonder characteristic. Katlia seriously thought over the hidden intent behind the world when she heard Miss Magician say, "Deal." "One haven't even made my offer," Katlia mumbled inwardly as she maintained her silence. She could tell that the world and the magician had reached a strange level of understanding on this matter, so she didn't interject. Similarly, she also sensed that something good had happened to the hanged man this week. He appeared more spirited than before, appearing more confident. He previously purchased the potion formula and main ingredients to Ocean Songster. He had also asked me where obnisks that do not belong to the Church of Storms can be found. This is likely related to the ritual. He has already advanced. Katlia suddenly felt a sense of danger. As the Admiral of Stars who was famous throughout the 5 seas, she always felt a sense of superiority in the Tarot Club. But in recent times, with the World Geoman Sparrow showing his ability at hunting pirate admirals, followed by the Hanged Man reaching Sequence 5, a Sequence 5 that made him adept at sea battles, she felt that she no longer had the right to belittle others. She felt a sense of urgency that hadn't existed in her for a long time. However, I have Sequence 4 ahead of me. It's the boundary between spirituality and godhood. It's not that easy to advance. I still don't see any hope despite preparing for years. Katlia sighed inwardly as she looked at the World Geoman Sparrow and asked, "Any chances for the blood of a mythical creature?" "I've been waiting for you to ask this." Fool Klein smiled while watching the transaction as he controlled the world to hoarsely laugh. "That angel got me to ask you what you can give him in exchange for a drop of blood. He emphasizes that it needs to satisfy him." "Angel?" Mr. World directly contacted an angel. Furthermore, he has convinced the angel to provide a drop of blood. Audrey was first alarmed before her thoughts raced as she turned to look at the seat of honor. She suspected that the world, Mr. Fool's blessed, had contacted an angel that was in service to Mr. Fool. She was like the magician, believing that the world only knew of clues to the location of an angel or its remains. They never expected him to directly converse with an angel. One had to know that the grounded angels were equivalent to the leaders of the 7 churches. Indeed, Alger sighed silently, believing that his guess has been verified. As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed, Katlia held back her surprise and shock as she pondered. "May I know what pathway this angel is from?" The world surveyed the area and said, "Monster." Monster, which means it's an angel from the fate pathway. It's no wonder Mr. Fool's honorific name has the words King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck. Audrey, Derek and company were enlightened, believing that their inferences matched the actual situation and the inherent logic. Their gazes and guesses stirred Klein. He realized a corresponding problem. In the honorific name he fabricated, the description of wielding good luck had successfully been directed towards the mysterious space above the gray fog. Is this related to why the people from the fate pathway can see my uniqueness? Could this be related to why the Snake of Mercury, Will Ossipton, took the initiative to establish friendly ties with me? In my honorific name's 3 lines, the first line is a description of my inherent self, and the second is about the corresponding divine domain. Only the third line involves the authority. Wields good luck, of course. The Fool itself can also contain a certain amount of authority. Klein suddenly felt that he needed to find an opportunity to communicate with the unborn fetus. However, he suspected that the paper crane would tear at any moment. This was because just erasing the original content was already a rather precarious process. At this moment, Katlia said, "Thanks for your help. I will seriously consider it and give you a response as soon as possible." She planned on consulting Queen Mystic to see if there were any conditions that would entice an angel from the fate pathway. With the conversation between the world and the hermit ending, the transactions came to a formal end. The tarot gathering then proceeded into a period for free communication. Forrest thought for a moment and looked at Lin. "He'd like to remind you of 2 things. First, be familiar with the powers on each corresponding page. It will be very dangerous if you were to flip to the wrong page and use the wrong power in combat." Lin scoffed immediately as he said, "I'm very confident in my intelligence." Forrest didn't speak further and switched to mentioning, "A serious case involving Beyonders happened in East Borough. The surrounding region is on high alert. If you plan on carrying out any operations, take note of that." Lin viewed this piece of information with great importance as he asked, Are you aware of what happened? Upon hearing Mr. Moon's question, Forrest nearly blurted out, "Of course. Better than anyone else. I'm just not too aware of the details." However, she controlled her mouth in time as she apprehensively looked at Mr. World. At the same time, Alger, Audrey, and Catlia vaguely guessed that the serious matter that had happened in Backland's East Borough was the assassination of the Aurora Order's oracle. Based on the inferences they had before, it was done by the World. And as Lin wasn't a spectator, he wasn't able to tell from her eye. All Forrest could do was force a smile at Lin. TM unable to tell you the specific. T only know that demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm domain appeared back. The Church of Storms places a great deal of attention over the matter. She didn't dare divulge the reasons on behalf of Mr. World, simply describing what she had seen. She believed that if Mr. World was willing to reveal more, he definitely would have added on to her answer. Demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm domain. Audrey and company were taken aback, as they instinctively doubted the accuracy of their theory. They had previously imagined that Leymano's travels had been created after the death of the Aurora Order Oracle. Therefore, the World had no way of borrowing Mr. Fool's demigod-level powers to record them before the assassination. The serious case involving Beyonders in Eastborough has nothing to do with Mr. World. No first glance is enough proof that it was caused by Mr. World. But why would a demigod-level Beyonder power of the Storm domain appear? One possibility is that Leymano's travels isn't a result of this assassination, but that it originally belonged to Four. Another possibility is that a cardinal of the Church of Storms or a Beyonder with the corresponding sealed artifact had delivered an attack. If it were the former, needing Mr. World to use the Beyonder powers at the demigod level implies that the Oracle was relatively powerful with the possible existence of a saint backing it. If it were the latter, to have Mr. World still be able to leave safely after such an assault implies his formidableness, of course. The possibility can't be eliminated that he deliberately lured the Church of Storms to encounter the Aurora Order's Oracle, and while a battle broke out between demigods, he efficiently carried out an assassination during the chaos. Audrey made some guesses based on the details she had observed, and each guess implied one thing: the World had the strength, intelligence, support, and ability, making him one of the top sequence 5 Beyonders below that of demigods. How terrifying! As expected of Mr. Fool's Blessed, when I arrive at a cathedral, I should be able to figure out what happened. Alger also made a basic judgment of the situation as he saw it. All he could do was console himself. With such a helper, the exploration of the primitive island would only be easier. As for Catlia, she shared similar thoughts with Audrey. She planned on asking Queen Mystic about the situation. This owner of the Dawn had previously revealed in her letter that she would be in Backland for the time being. Demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm domain. Lin repeated Miss Magician's words as his head ached. Although he enjoyed staying at home and not heading out, he still needed to head out to get some blood to drink from the hospital. Being in a big city, he was equipped with common knowledge. Together with his elders' warnings and guidance, he knew a lot about the official organizations like the Machinery Hivemen, mandated Punishers, and Nighthawks. He knew the influence that a serious case would bring to the area. If I don't have a good disguise while infiltrating Eastborough, I might be caught by the mandated Punishers before I even approach my targets. Although I have the identity of being part of the Church of Mother Earth and wouldn't be impounded underground or made into a test subject of sealed artifacts, this also means that my operation has failed. I might even have Leymano's travels taken away. During such times, taking the sewers would be even more dangerous. Who knows how many official Beyonders are lying in ambush over there? Lin suddenly felt that what seemed like a simple mission had turned difficult. He quickly came to a decision that he would take action in the latter half of the night. During this time, the low-class residents of Eastborough would begin returning home from work. Although it was dark, the streets would be bustling. Even if the mandated Punishers had 10 times more manpower, it was impossible to carry out any strict surveillance and single out every possible suspect. The next important step is to plan the operation to finish off the 2 artificial vampires without causing much of a stir. I'll have to consider a situation of an intense battle that's impossible to hide. Wait, Miss Magician had just mentioned that Leymano's travels has a Beyonder power known as teleport. The problem is resolved. Lin heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. T will keep that in mind. He had said that sentence very calmly and with great confidence, as though everything was in control. This fellow Emlyn was first stumped before feeling relief. There's a 90% chance he recalled the traveler's door in Lemano's travels. If I hadn't obtained traveling, I definitely would have added the condition that no one is to touch that spellbook's page before the world jam and sparrow. Klein scoffed silently without a word. As there was only one traveler's door in Lemano's travels, he definitely needed to use creeping hunger for his return trip to the primitive island. In that case, he might as well exploit the glove as he needed to feed a death row convict to it. He didn't want to waste it. Anyways, I've warned you. Forrest didn't speak further, wishing that everything would go smoothly for Mr. Moon. At that moment, Alger turned to look at Little Sun. Are you still in the City of Silver? Yes, my recent mission is to acquaint myself with my powers and patrol the surrounding area, Derek replied honestly. Alger thought for a moment before saying, has that shepherd elder not looked for you recently? No. Derek paused. The 6-member council seems to be busy with the former chief's mausoleum. As for what it is, I'm not privy to the information. Klein had heard Little Sun mention of the former chief of the City of Silver. It was said that he had built a mausoleum that reached deep underground before moving into it, and he hadn't appeared again. It was suspected that his attempt to switch to sequence 3 of the death pathway had failed. I wonder what happened inside the mausoleum. My spiritual intuition tells me that there's danger involved. Before Klein spoke, he heard Alger say, take note of this matter. To investigate the former chief's mausoleum at such a critical moment means that it's something important. It might bring you danger. Okay. Derek nodded strongly. I'll do my best to figure out the specifics. The exchange continued. As the members didn't encounter much this week, this segment quickly came to an end. The Tarot Club members began teaching the sun mysticism languages of the outside world as they learned about ancient myths from it. During this process, Audrey was a little disappointed and depressed. She had failed to buy anything or share anything this week, and her participation appeared lacking. So my life has been too quiet and stable. I have nothing to share, however, this is normal. As the daughter of one of the top 3 bankers in the kingdom, a daughter of Eastchester's Earl, if I were to frequently encounter Beyonder matters, experiencing alarming and exciting matters every week, that means that the present society and government structure is unable to maintain the order of the Beyonder world. It would definitely result in a fundamental change to everything. When I return to Backland, my contact with the psychology alchemists will increase. I'll be able to change this situation. Audrey rapidly became optimistic, and she stood up and bade Mr. Fool farewell. Over the past half a year, she had read quite a number of useful books thanks to Susie. In terms of profundity and maturity, she was a lot better than before. Backland Street, Northborough, 160 Backland Street. After ending the Tarot Club, Klein walked to the attached balcony to his bedroom, and he looked at the surrounding environment, which was filled with vegetation. With Miss Magician's attempt to rent out Lemano's travels, there will be more of such Tarot Club transactions in the future. They might not have realized that their own Beyonder powers can be sold. Once the rentals happen more frequently, someone will ultimately request someone to help record a particular power. When the time comes, I'll be able to supply Beyonder powers of various domains thanks to the numerous mystical items I have. It won't be too expensive, but it's long-lasting, and it will often be in demand. I wonder who will be the first to muster their courage to seek the Fool for help, hoping that a demigod power can be recorded. This needs to be a fair exchange, and a sufficient price needs to be paid. If no one dares take that step, afraid that it's blasphemous, I can let the world be an example. After all, Mr. Fool has shown his friendliness and casualness from the beginning. As long as no mistakes are made, similar transactions can be made. Having the precedent of punishing Ma'am Hermit, I don't believe anyone will belittle the Fool as a result. They would be honored, delighted, and fearful. Klein thought about the Tarot Club as his thoughts wandered, filled with anticipation towards the trade of Beyonder powers in the future. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. Please enter. Dwayne Dantier's with his gray sideburns turned around and said. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Butler Walter in his white gloves walked in and said respectfully, Sir, Ma'am Mary from the National Atmospheric Pollution Council is here to visit you. Do you wish to meet her? Mary Scott, the major shareholder of the Coim Company, the lady who got me to investigate her former husband's adultery. Why is she here? Don't tell me that Dwayne Dantès has caught her fancy. Klein was slightly puzzled as he nodded with a smile. It's almost tea time. Let's have it a little earlier. All right, I will invite Ma'am Mary to the activity room on the second story. Walter easily understood his employer's intention. Klein nodded slightly without saying anything else. With the help of his valet, Richardson, he wore his coat and went down to the second story. Soon, he saw Ma'am Mary with her tall cheekbones in the activity room. This lady was dressed in a dark blue dress with elegant accessories in an ostentatious but restrained manner. Compared to last year, she appeared more classy and with a higher temperament. Good afternoon, ma'am. I've always been considering finding a time to visit you. I would wish to hear about your investigations on Backland's atmospheric pollution. Klein took the initiative to speak politely. Mary replied with a smile. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to wait for it. After exchanging a few words of pleasantries as they talked about the recent weather, Klein sat on a single-seater as he raised his porcelain teacup. Ma'am, you seem to have something troubling you. He could tell that Mary was hesitant and deliberating. Mary laughed as she sighed. I've heard about your experience and wisdom. I believe that you're a gentleman with excellent foresight. This is the thing. Are you interested in purchasing some of the Coim Company's share? Why? Ma'am, are you in trouble? Klein asked in a staid manner. Mary shook her head. Someone else is selling them. Investment someone else is selling. Klein ruminated over those words without immediately asking. After the servant placed the silver three-layered tray down for high tea and left, he said with a smile, Ma'am, why don't you purchase it yourself? Even a blind person knows that loan will place more attention on environmental pollution in the future. Therefore, the Coim Company, that deal with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, definitely has a promising future. It being worth $500,000 or even £1,000,000 wouldn't be a fantasy. Of course, the premise is that the company's management can keep up with the corresponding expansion. In such a situation, the acquisition of shares in the Coim Company is definitely a profitable business. If I were you, I'd take it for myself, no matter how much debt I get myself into. Mary used 2 fingers to pick a cucumber sandwich from the bottom silver tray, took a tiny nibble, and slowly chewed before swallowing it down. With this as a buffer, she finally organized her words. Ever since the law to fix atmospheric pollution was passed, the Coim Company has been rapidly developing. Faces of the shareholders have begun changing. As you know, people who have their sights on money will often have good business sense. And behind them, there are usually some powerful figures at play. I weren't a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, and had used this to get to know quite a number of nobles and high-ranking government officials. I believe I wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure, and I would end up selling my shares at a relatively good price. I would then leave the stage with a considerably good profit. But even so, most of the shares will quickly concentrate, and I'll quickly lose my status as the highest shareholder, losing control over the company's direction. This is something I inherited from my father. I don't want it to become somebody else's toy. I wish for it to slowly develop into the biggest anthracite and high-quality supplier to Backland, or even all of the Lone Kingdom. It's not that I haven't tried other solutions. I've pledged my shares and sold my property, investing a large sum of my liquidity into it, absorbing 15% of the shares in secret, as well as requesting friends that I can trust to help. I've obtained a total of 10% of the shares, and together with the 20% I originally had, I hold 45% in total. The current situation is that a minor shareholder suddenly decided to liquidate his 3%, and my friends and I temporarily do not have the money to acquire. This is a commercial war. This was a first for Klein, who was accustomed to dealing with Beyonders. He found it fresh but also unfamiliar. He similarly reached out his hand and selected a sandwich which had high-quality turkey at the bottom of the 3-layered tray. As he ate, he contemplated for about 10 seconds and said, "The shares that you acquire later can also be pledged, right? There won't be enough time. The other party has already provided an offer, and the transaction can be closed at any time," Mary said as she finished the food in her hand. Klein leaned back into his sofa in a relaxed manner. "Why did you come to me?" Upon hearing the question, Mary heaved a slight sigh of relief. "First, you must have brought quite a sizable amount of money to Backland. You wouldn't need to raise funds through different means. Second, you just came to Backland, so you aren't deeply involved with the other party or in other aspects. This also means that I'm not afraid that you would violate the terms of the agreement. Even if you choose to align with them, you'll have to consider if it's worth violating the law. Third, although we've only met once, I believe you are a very dignified and knowledgeable gentleman. Your praise is leaving me a little embarrassed, however. It also means that my acting performance as Dwayne Dantes is effective. At the very least, everyone knows that he's a middle-aged gentleman with foresight and competence, with plenty of money that he has nowhere to invest. Considering the original £16,493 and Miss Magician's 6,000 pounds, as well as the £48 provided by Mr. X, I have a total of £22,991 and 5 gold coins. Even if I deduct the £5,987 I owe Miss Messenger, I'll be considered a true tycoon. Many people with assets worth £100,000 might not have that much liquidity. Klein couldn't help but do account of his wealth as he asked with a smile, "Ma'am, what do you wish for me to do?" Mary sipped some tea and said eloquently, "Acquire the 3% share. But before that, I'll sign 2 contracts with you. The first contract stipulates that I'll forcefully purchase the shares from you in 3 months and buy it at the highest price over this period of time. The corresponding tax will be shouldered by me. The second contract stipulates that we act in concert. In addition, I will make you a member of the board of directors for the Coin Company. You will enjoy the corresponding perks as you monitor the company's development. This will help you be integrated even better into high society." Sounds like a sure win. It's equivalent to me providing a loan, and Ma'am Mary will repay me with a certain amount of interest and social resources, and compared to a debt agreement, I'll be holding on to the shares of an excellent company. It's more secure, after all. We are considered strangers. Of course, that's under the premise that the Coin Company itself is all right. This is also why she's making me a director. Klein analyzed the conditions proposed by Ma'am Mary and slowly felt enticed by them. From his point of view, Dwayne Dantes needed some investments. Otherwise, he would appear suspicious. Then, selecting the kind of investment was a rather important problem, since it had to be considered that Dwayne Dantes might have to give up everything and leave Backlund because of his operation's failure or success. When the time comes, there's a chance to take away the money, but I can forget about the shares. This kind of investment, one that allows me to quickly recoup my investment, meets my requirements. I might even earn quite a bit. Klein contemplated for a moment before warmly smiling. Helping a lady resolve problems is something that I need to do. Ma'am Mary immediately felt relieved. Just as she was about to say something, she heard Dwayne Dantes' attractive voice continue, "However, I'm rather cautious in regards to any investments I make. T will hire a lawyer and an accounting team to investigate the Coin Company's situation. I'll try to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible, and if there aren't any problems, we can begin our cooperation. Aside from that, I will also do a divination," Klein silently added inwardly. "Definitely." Ma'am Mary smiled and added, "I'll bear the cost for such expenses." Klein didn't reject the offer as he nodded and said, "How much would the 3% shares cost?" "The current valuation is £9,600, but the shareholder believes that the Coin Company has a promising future, so it can't be lower than £12,000. Mary gave him the exact details. "Phew," Klein used a calm and relaxed manner to smile. "That's still all right. Dwayne Dantes is indeed rich," Mary thought as she said, "Dwayne can invite you to visit the Coin Company tomorrow." "That's exactly what I wish for," Klein replied with a smile. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of something. His former landlord, Stellan Sammer's husband, was likely still a manager at Coin Company. Yet another familiar face, but it's not one for Dwayne Dantes. Klein felt wistful for some baffling reason. At 8 p.m., there were still crowds of people entering East Borough from the other streets. Fatigue obviously colored their faces. And this continued almost until 10. Emlyn White had changed into a grayish-blue worker's attire, wore a cap, and hid himself in the alley of the Backland Bridge area while observing the poor that sauntered back and forth. Although he didn't have any experience in disguising himself, he had eyes and brain. Just a short observation was enough for him to discover the problems with his attire. The most important point was that, compared to the poor who had dirty and ragged clothes, the work attire he had bought in the afternoon was too new and clean, easily attracting the attention of others. Emlyn thought for a moment, returned to the dark alley and reached out his fingers. Using what he had seen, he began tearing open the areas that were easily damaged. Then he observed his surrounding, as his facial muscles gradually distorted into a grimace. With a look of contempt, Emlyn came to the wall, closed his eyes, and began dabbing the dirt onto his clothes and pants. The smell of coal, the smell of rotting mud, the smell of PPSS. Emlyn subconsciously extended his palm away from himself as he covered his mouth with his other hand. He nearly vomited. At this moment, he realized that having an extraordinary sense of smell wasn't necessarily a good thing. After a few minutes of excruciating torture, Emlyn finally finished his disguise. Even his handsome face was stained with coal. With this disguise, he hunched his back and slipped into the crowd, quickly entering East Borough without garnering any attention. As he walked, Emlyn realized a problem. He wasn't familiar with the roads at all. He had no idea where Limestone Street or Beluga Whale Street was in East Borough, while most of the street signs had already been damaged. An assassination attempt really is a troublesome matter, Emlyn mumbled as he began asking around for direction. After nearly an hour of hard work, he finally arrived at Limestone Street. The streets were narrow, with the buildings on both sides leaning close to each other. Even in the day, it appeared dark. At night, it gave off a terrifying sense of creepiness and darkness. But to the sanguine, such an environment wasn't bad. The only problem was the dirt and messiness. After spraying a medicine that eliminated his scent, Emlyn walked into the condominium at Unit 6, went to the third story, and approached the public washroom with his nose pinched before standing outside the room of primordial moon believer Argus. Emlyn cocked his ears to listen for a while before he stopped pinching his nose in puzzlement. He nearly fainted from the stench wafting over from the washroom. It took him a great bit of effort to focus his gaze on the room. His sense of smell told him that there wasn't anyone inside, nor were there any corpses. He moved away. Or he isn't back. Emlyn muttered silently in a daze. He never expected his hunt to be so unsuccessful. After reining in his emotions, Emlyn left the condominium and rushed to 19 Beluga Whale Street. This time, he was delighted to discover that someone was home. Golly's Kevin was home. At that moment, Emlyn caught the scent of another person. It was very identical to Argus's apartment at Limestone Street. There are two people in the room. Argus isn't home because he came to Golly's Kevin, too. Emlyn's expression suddenly froze. He wasn't worried if it was one-on-one. But if it was one against two, he was still a little fearful with Leymano's travel. After all, the two of them were artificial vampires with rather significant strength. As a sanguine who liked to stay home, the number of battles Emlyn had involved himself in could be counted on one hand. Furthermore, he had never attempted fighting in the state of a numbers disadvantage. Be it his attack on the previous primordial moon believer, or resisting Bishop Otravsky from the Harvest Church, he basically had the numerical advantage in being the worst at one-on-one fights. Thinking back to the failure of his family of three, attempting to defeat the half-giant bishop, Emlyn's expression turned livid, as though he had recalled the torture he suffered back at the Harvest Church. As there weren't many residents living here, and with Golly's Kevin having sharp senses as an artificial vampire, he didn't dare stay outside the door for too long. He quickly walked past the area and walked to the end of the corridor and hid in the shadows. What should I do next? Emlyn leaned against random objects that blocked the crimson sunlight as his thoughts rapidly whirled in an attempt to find a solution with his pitiful amounts of experience. Gradually, the words which the hanged man had taught the sun surfaced in his mind. Patience is an important premise when dealing with many situations. Only by being able to curb your urges and irascibility will you be able to avoid danger to the greatest extent. At times, tolerance is very important. Tolerance. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and knew what he needed to do. He planned on laying an ambush until Argus left. As this wasn't the artificial vampire's residence, it was certain that he would leave. When the time came, Emlyn could deal with a one-on-one situation. Patience, tolerance, waiting. Emlyn repeated these words inwardly so as to resist the damage the surroundings were dealing to him. The air wafting through the first floor of the condominium was filled with the stench of piss, rotting moisture, the unflushed smell of feces, the odor of some of its residents, as well as all kinds of nauseating, unpleasant, and disgusting smell. Mixed together, they were like a poison that ate at Emlyn's senses. For the first time in his life, Emlyn wished that he could slice off his nose. He had the feeling as though he was stuck in an abyss, or was in hell suffering torture. Patience, tolerance, waiting. He mechanically chanted the principles, finding each second that passed excruciatingly long. Finally, he saw Golly's Kevin's door open. A thin, dark brown figure walked out. His cheekbones protruded, and he had a high, sharp, and crooked nose. He was none other than the primordial moon believer, Argos. At that moment, his face had patches of swollen festering that looked disgusting. Indeed, as that young boss Ian said, these fellows wear clothes that are clean and tidy, completely unlike the residents of East Borough. Emlyn became spirited as he watched Argus leave the condominium. After patiently waiting for nearly 5 minutes, he stood up and decided to take action. As his target, Golly's Kevin, was an artificial vampire, Emlyn was rather aware of his opponent's strengths and traits. Hence, he had made preparations in a targeted manner. Golly's Kevin's sense of smell isn't weaker than mine when I just came of age. This actually cannot be confirmed. For him to stay in such an environment, he might have already lost his nose and brains. Besides, his spirituality can't be weak, and he has an innate instinct that's geared towards danger. His vision and hearing can't be too bad either. As Emlyn viewed his opponent with scorn, he consumed a potion and sprayed out a liquid to cover his body's scent again. Right on the heels of that, by consuming the potion and spraying it on like last time, he hid his body in a tire, disappearing as though he had been wiped away by an eraser. In a dark, uninhabited corner, a palm-sized notebook which was bronze-green in color had suddenly appeared out of thin air, as though it had passed through a transparent screen. It began flipping itself almost silently before fixing onto a white page that was filled with astromancy symbols. As these symbols vanished, the surroundings brightened up a little. This was the disruption ability of an astrologer. Then Lemano's travels was retracted, disappearing inch by inch as it was completely concealed by the invisible screen. Prepared, Emlyn recalled his plans. He lightened his footsteps and silently arrived outside Golly's Kevin's apartment without approaching the door. The notebook appeared out of thin air once again, before being flipped to the door opening page. An illusory sound immediately resounded in Emlyn's mind as it prompted him to reach out a hand towards the wall. At the same time, Emlyn cautiously pulled back Lemano's travels into his clothes, using his invisible coat to hide it. When Emlyn's palm finally pressed the wall, he saw a ghostly blue, incorporeal, blurry door appear before his eyes. It was embedded in the wall, but it also showed signs of masonry at the bottom. Cocking his ear to hear the goings-on inside the house, he took a sniff of the air before taking a step forward. He then passed through the ghostly blue door, as if he was passing a screen of water. The scene before him changed immediately. It was filled with walls covered in stains and 3 wooden beds on the side, a worn-out cupboard, and all kinds of miscellaneous items. This was the inside of Golly's Kevin's apartment. As for the ghostly blue door behind Emlyn, it had long vanished as if it had never existed before. Cautiously surveying the area, Emlyn caught sight of his target, Golly's Kevin. This primordial moon believer was a good-looking mixed blood. He had long hair that reached his shoulders, and his eyes were a little red, as though he didn't fully acquire the eyes of a sanguine. At that moment he was sitting by the side of the bed, staring at the door, his thoughts a mystery. Emlyn circled to his side without causing a commotion. He took out Lemano's travels, which he ensured was in a blind spot, and he flipped to a page that left his fingers slightly numb. It was a yellowish-brown goatskin page. The surface was filled with all kinds of ancient and distorted symbols and patterns. Together, they constructed a figure that looked like a thin tree with outstretched branches. After adjusting his angle, Emlyn slid his finger across the page. Suddenly, silver lightning illuminated the room as if it was daytime. A sizzling sound was heard as the lightning smote Golly's Kevin on the head, charring the primordial moon believer instantly. His body convulsed as his eyes lost focus. The silver bolts of lightning continued snaking around while Emlyn's figure surfaced behind the frozen target's back. He reached out his right palm and clenched his opponent's neck. "Catcha!" He calmly snapped Golly's Kevin's neck and yanked off his head and tossed the body away, eliminating the possibility of letting his opponent heal himself with his strong restorative powers. Puh! Golly's Kevin's headless corpse collapsed to the ground as blood sprayed everywhere. An artificial vampire lost its life just like that. Emlyn's calm expression was quickly replaced with surprise. He looked at the head in his hand with disbelief. He realized that Golly's Kevin didn't realize what was happening even upon death. Fixed in his eyes were pain and puzzlement. It's that easy. It happened like a breeze. Although Emlyn was proud, he didn't believe that he could finish off an artificial vampire that easily. However, reality told him that it was as easy as a breeze. A lightning strike that can cause paralysis, together with my high movement speed, had allowed me to instantly kill my target. Heh. The premise is that he's weak to lightning, allowing him to be easily paralyzed. Also, I had interfered with his spiritual intuition ahead of time and avoided attacking him head-on by passing through the wall. Those were key to my success. After a few seconds of surprise, Emlyn recalled the details and concluded plenty of useful experience. This made him truly realize the potency of matching Beyonder powers, as well as the value of Leimano's travel. It's no wonder Mr. Hanged Man was the first one to have thoughts of renting it. Emlyn reined in his thoughts and looked at the blood that gushed out of Golly's Kevin. His throat couldn't help but move. He hadn't had that much fresh blood in a while. However, he didn't dare drink it. This was because the deceased Beyonder characteristic had yet to appear. The blood would still contain parts of it, and drinking it would easily result in excessive Beyonder characteristics, adding the risk of losing control. This wasn't conducive to his subsequent operation. Emlyn retracted his gaze and surveyed the surrounding. He found a stack of old newspapers and a tiny wooden chest. He planned on using that to store Golly's Kevin's head in. And before that, he sat down and waited for the Beyonder characteristic to appear. 2 minutes later, Emlyn suddenly looked up at the door. He heard footsteps. Immediately after that, he caught the scent of Argus. Why is this artificial vampire back? He returned midway. Emlyn White instantly became a little nervous, unsure how he was going to handle the issue. Thump! Argus knocked on the door from the outside without making a sound. This resulted in an abnormal silence. Emlyn was stunned. He immediately understood that Argus had caught scent of the blood and knew that something had happened inside. What should I do? Rush out and finish him? No, others will see me if I do so. I would then be caught by the official Beyonders. Emlyn instinctively took out a potion Ad planned on hiding himself again. Suddenly, he had an idea. Exhaling silently, Emlyn placed Golly's Kevin on the bed as he drank an invisibility potion and spewed out the corresponding amount of liquid. Slowly and very gently, he moved to a corner of the room and hid there. This way, it made it seem like the assassination was completed and that the murderer had long fled the scene. As time passed, aside from the occasional passing by of the residents, there was silence both inside and outside. Suddenly, Golly's Kevin's window creaked open as a pair of eyes shot its gaze inside. After careful inspection, Argus, with a festering face, leaped into the room and slowly walked to the corpse which was still indistinctly expelling the Beyonder characteristic. In the corner, Emlyn White secretly took out Leimano's travels while Argus wasn't looking in his direction. He flipped to another page of Lightning Strike. At this moment, Argus's sight landed on the bed and on his companion's head, as well as the stack of old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. His pupils suddenly constricted. Proficient not good. Emlyn White traced Argus's gaze and realized that he had forgotten to deal with the old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. Although they were part of the room, they were placed in different parts of the room. Now they were put together, making it appear rather odd. It was as though someone had wanted to do something with them before having to give up for the time being. Then why would there be a need to give up? Was the person alarmed by the knocking of the door? That means that the murderer hadn't left and is hiding in a particular corner of the room. Similar thoughts flashed in Argus's and Emlyn's mind at the same time. However, one of them was feeling perplexed, while the other was reverse inferring the other party's thoughts. No good. The two vampires reacted at the same time as Argus lunged to the side, as he emitted thick black gases that resembled a bat's wing. As for Emlyn White, his finger quickly swiped across the open Leimano's travel. Suddenly, a silver hue appeared, illuminating the room again. The lightning that branched out didn't hit Argus and ended up hitting the ground beside the bed. It broke up into countless thin bolts that snaked towards conductive material. Here, the wing which Argus used thick black gases to create seemed to attract the lightning. It was pursued by the snaking lightning as they struck him, spreading across his body. Argus became numb for a second and crashed down to the ground before he could leap up. Emlyn hurriedly flipped through Leimano's travels and once again slid his finger across a lightning strike page. Although he didn't know why there were so many pages of lightning strike, with them taking up nearly half of the yellowish-brown goatskin, he was overjoyed that he could keep using them. The silver bolts of lightning crashed down, smiting Argus, causing his body to emit black smoke despite having just recovered from his numbed state. Failing to leap away, his body began to convulse uncontrollably. Seizing this opportunity, Emlyn White bent his knee and leaped forward with his feet, approaching Argus with afterimages trailing behind him. Then he wrapped his right arm around Target's head, easily flashing behind him. "Catcha?" Argus directly saw his back. His eyes filled with blood as the few festering parts on his face burst open as deep and illusory darkness poured out from inside. Emlyn had no idea what had happened. He slid backward instinctively as he kept changing his positioning. Argus didn't pursue him as his eyes lost their rationality. All that was left was pure malicious intent, madness, and clear blankness. He raised his hands and pressed them against his head before forcefully twisting it, allowing it to return to its normal orientation with a crisp crack. And around this artificial vampire, the darkness surged as though it wanted to devour everything. Then Argus stretched his neck from side to side as his body swelled and oozed out disgusting pus. He had come to Golly's Kevin tonight because his body had shown signs of losing control. There was a need to discuss a solution. He returned midway because he suddenly came to a realization that perhaps the harsh environment had caused intense negative effects to him due to his extraordinary sense of smell and sensitivity, thus resulting in him having signs of losing control. And at that moment, he completely broke down with the shadow of death hanging over him. He had lost control. Emlyn White's heart palpitated when Argus swept his gaze across him. He felt that he had encountered trouble again, as he couldn't help but curse the primordial moon's believers for often making themselves into monsters. He didn't immediately pray to Mr. Fool for two reasons. First, there wasn't any time as his opponent was about to launch an attack. Second, in a one-on-one situation, Emlyn believed that it wasn't too dangerous dealing with a Sequence 7 rampage. He made every second count by flipping through Lemano's travels quickly, letting it land on the page with lightning strike again. Puh! Thick, distorted bolts of silver lightning smote down heavily as it flailed its claws, striking the mutated Argus. At that moment, the lightning seemed to shatter the surging darkness, but it also seemed to be devoured by it. The two vanished at the same time, leaving behind Argus, who had finally locked his sights onto Emlyn. This artificial vampire who had lost control produced afterimages as he pounced towards his target. Emlyn crouched down and rolled, dodging the lethal strike. At the same time, he reached his free right hand into his pocket and took out a metal bottle. Bam! As Argus quickly turned around, he instantly appeared near his enemy. Puh! Without any time to remove the cover, Emlyn clenched his fingers, pinching open a crack in the metal bottle. Then he threw the bottle ahead, letting the pure and radiant liquid inside splatter towards the approaching Argus. This was sun water, which he had concocted with his spirituality. It was extremely strong against vampires. This was the preparation that a potions professor had to do in advance. Being splashed by the liquid, Argus let out a blood-curdling scream. Wisps of black smoke billowed from his body as he lost his strength in midair. Bang! Although he collided with Emlyn, he failed to make him lose his balance. Emlyn tumbled twice, but didn't suffer any actual damage. While tumbling, Emlyn ignored managing his injuries. He swatted his right hand, which had made contact with a few drops of sun water, and quickly flipped Lemano's travel. Puh! Another bolt of silver lightning smote down, causing Argus's tragic cries to come to an end. This vampire who had lost control had appeared to be suffering the radiance of the sun from a close distance, as he fell into a state of intense paralysis. Emlyn seized this opportunity and took out another bottle of sun water. He unscrewed the cap and poured it towards his opponent. This time, Argus didn't even manage to let out a cry. His body began to melt like wax. It was only then that Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. He then conjured a thick black fog behind him, turning it into illusory bats the size of a palm as they swarmed towards his target. The black bats landed on Argus, enveloping him completely. Following that, they separated and flew back to Emlyn before vanishing. Argus's body had shrunk quite noticeably, and he finally couldn't hold out any longer. In his half-melted state, he slowly collapsed. Only then did Emlyn raise his right hand to check on the remnant pain. He saw that his palm and a few fingers had wounds that were corroding. However, the flesh inside was rapidly squirming as they healed themselves. "It's over, I actually finished him." Emlyn retracted his gaze and looked at Argus's corpse in slight disbelief. Although this hunt had quite a few ups and downs, he hadn't encountered any real danger the entire time. This made him realize that the existence of the Tarot Club made him far stronger than he imagined. If Argus had checked Golly's Kevin's corpse first and not noticed the newspapers and wooden chest, he definitely would have figured out that I possess Beyonder powers like lightning strike. He wouldn't have used Wings of Darkness while dodging and end up being hit by the lightning. But this way, he wouldn't have discovered any abnormalities and wouldn't have made any evasive maneuvers ahead of time. My lightning strike would have struck him directly, and things would have been easier. Viewing it from this angle, no matter what happened, I would be able to kill him as long as I didn't make a mistake in my handling of matters. They're really weak, so I'm already this powerful. It's no wonder the ancestor made me join the Tarot Club. This is a gathering that prepares the various races for the impending apocalypse. It's of a much higher level than the other secret organization. Emlyn tipped his chin up a little as he couldn't help but curl his lips. Following that, he heard footsteps outside, but no one dared to approach. Argus's scream must have alarmed the surrounding residents, but they wouldn't dare enter because they're afraid of trouble. However, someone will definitely report it to the police. I need to clear the scene as quickly as possible and leave. Emlyn retracted his gaze from the door and walked to Golly's Kevin's corpse. From the pooling blood, he picked up an item the size of a fist. It was completely red in color and resembled a heart. It was expanding and contracting slightly, and its surface was translucent. He could vaguely see a liquid flowing inside, and it was none other than the Beyonder characteristic of a Sequence 7 vampire of the apothecary pathway. This is my trophy. Emlyn momentarily felt unaccustomed to it. After calming himself, he wrapped the Beyonder characteristic in Golly's Kevin's head with the old newspapers and stuffed it into the wooden chest. After placing the wooden chest to the side, he yanked Argus's head, whose form looked nothing like before. He then took out another bottle of medicine and scattered in every corner of the room. During this process, Emlyn wasn't flustered at all. It was as though he wasn't worried that the official Beyonders in East Borough would rush over. A few minutes later, he picked up Argus's mutated Beyonder characteristic, glancing at its surface, which was nearly black in color, and the indistinct human face pattern. Behind him, a black gas was emanated. The black gas transformed into countless tiny bats again as they flew within the room. They combined with the potion liquid that had been sprayed earlier, forming a silent black flame that spread outwards. The black flames burned away the blood and corpse, as well as the traces of the lightning strike. All that was left was a layer of sticky liquid that resembled asphalt covering the different objects in the room. Then these liquid bodies turned into heavy black bats as they spiraled around Emlyn's body. Emlyn didn't have extravagant hopes that his actions could completely interfere in subsequent investigation. He only had one goal: to make the situation look okay. This made the police or official Beyonders who took on the case write off the matter as something of little value. After a simple investigation, they would file it away and not pay any further attention to it. After doing all of this, Emlyn, with his cap and blackened face, surveyed the room. Following that, he bowed slightly at the crimson moon. Meanwhile, he flipped the pages of Lemano's travels and had it stop at teleportation. Emlyn's figure, along with the heavy bats, immediately turned transparent and formless as he vanished from the spot. After nearly 15 minutes, a few policemen from East Borough rushed in. They crashed through the door but didn't discover any residents or corpses. They yawned languidly and forced the onlooking residents to admit that they had been hallucinating, thus ending the investigation. This was the efficiency and style of the East Borough police. After leaving East Borough, Emlyn first headed home and hid Lemano's travel. Then, with his spoils, he headed straight for Odera's house in West Borough. He wanted to declare his victory and claim his reward. Inside Odera's villa, Emlyn saw Cosme, who was also a baron like he was. This sanguine, who seemed like a man in his prime, was Nibs Odera's spokesperson. "I'm also a baron, and one that recently achieved adulthood at that," Emlyn mumbled inwardly. He got up from the sofa in the activity room and bowed. "Good evening, my lord." Cosme was just about to say something when his nose twitched. He then cast his gaze toward the wooden chest beside Emlyn's feet. The smell of fresh blood. As he asked in puzzlement, he seemed to connect the dots and added after a second of thought, "You killed another target." Emlyn curled his lips and shook his head. "No." Then, before Cosme could ask further, his smile turned profound. "Not one but two." "Two?" The middle-aged gentleman was taken aback as he watched Emlyn bend down to open the lid. During this process, Emlin's facial muscles winced a little as this series of actions had touched the wound on his right hand. Holding back the change in his expression, Emlyn allowed his arm to hang down slightly, allowing the chest to tilt and reveal its contents to the sanguine baron opposite him. Two charred, bloody heads were stuffed inside a pile of old newspaper. By the side were two transparent objects which resembled hearts, one red with vitality and the other nearly black. This impactful scene was reflected in Cosme's eyes as he looked up in surprise, staring at Emlyn blankly as he blurted, "You did this." Although he had only managed to recognize one head being Golly's Kevin's, but the two vampire Beyonder characteristics couldn't be faked. Emlyn put down the wooden chest and allowed his right hand to hang down naturally. Surreptitiously, he flicked his right hand very slightly along the corners of his trousers as he replied with a smile, "Of course. This is the thing. After receiving the £7,000 reward back then, I bought a particular baron's legacy at a particular Beyonder gathering. With it I advanced. T don't wish to use money to satisfy the murderers who hunt us sanguine, but I didn't wish for this legacy to land in the hands of others. Besides, the seller wasn't necessarily the hunter." Taking this opportunity, Emlyn revealed the fact that he had already become a baron. Furthermore, every word he said was the truth. This was a technique he had learned from the Tarot Club. "I long knew that you were a baron. You think your frequent purchases of all kinds of items with spirituality and the borrowing of books that explain potions would go unnoticed. If it weren't because of certain factors, we would have questioned you long ago. What I'm surprised about is your combat ability. You don't even have a single mystical item, and with you only wishing to buy dolls, it's not easy to hunt two artificial vampires without causing a commotion. Even for a baron, even I would need to make plenty of preparations and acquire detailed intelligence before it's possible. Without anyone noticing it, Emlyn is already this strong." Cosme Odora couldn't help but lampoon as he revealed a fake smile. "So that's the reason, Emlyn. Why did you hide it from us? Don't you wish to be addressed as Lord by the other sanguine?" Emlyn glanced at the sanguine's expression and tilted his chin. T was planning on telling everyone, but since there was the hunting competition, I decided to give everyone a surprise. "Cosme, I've already hunted 3 of the primordial moon believers, and you gave 5 targets. Does this mean that I've won?" He couldn't wait to change his form of address from Lord to Cosme. Cosme's eyelids twitched as he chuckled. "Yes, that's right. You can ignore the 2 other targets. Leave it to Ruse Bathory and the rest. This way, they might still be eligible for a consolation prize." Having said that, Cosme found his attitude a little too cold, so he hurriedly asked in concern, "Were you injured?" "A little." Emlyn raised his right arm and stretched his finger. To be frank, on his hunt that night, the worst injury he suffered was after he teleported out of Eastborough. He had ripped apart his skin to wipe his blood across the cover of Leymano's Travel. Cosme didn't develop the topic as he said, after a few seconds of silence, "Congratulations on being the victor of this hunting competition. You will receive 2 prizes. First, if there's a chance to become a Viscount in the future, you will enter the final list of candidates, receiving free help for the ritual. Second, you will obtain a mystical item. It's a ring personally created by the ancestor. Although it doesn't contain any godhood, it possesses potent and very mystical powers. As the ancestor didn't name it, we all call it Lilith's ring. Also, according to convention, these 2 Beyonder characteristics will belong to the entire sanguine race. This way, we might be able to have 2 more newborns, and you would receive £3,000 in cash in return." A ring personally created made by the ancestor, although Emlyn was somewhat disappointed that the reward wasn't a Viscount's Beyonder characteristic, with it only being candidature and a free ritual. The ring made by sanguine ancestor Lilith herself was enough to put things right. A proud sanguine with a sense of racial superiority, this was the highest form of honor. As his joy was quelled, Emlyn, who had participated in several tarot gatherings and had completed 2 hunts, felt that things weren't that simple. "I was sent by the ancestor to Mr. Fool, and now I'm receiving a ring from the ancestor. Isn't that too much of a coincidence?" Emlyn thought for a moment and couldn't figure out the answer. He finally decided to pray to Mr. Fool later, describe the entire situation, and see what advice he could give him. Noticing that Emlyn's joy had subsided, and that he had remained silent for more than 10 seconds, Cosme cleared his throat. "That ring and the cash will be given to you tomorrow. When the time comes, I'll summon Ruse Bathory and company, officially announcing your victory in this hunting competition. Then the ring will be given to you. No problem. Although Emlyn lacked the experience in such matters, he knew that rewards couldn't be given in private. It needed to be given in front of all the participants. Without staying any longer, he bade farewell and left Odora's villa in a rental carriage. As the carriage slowly drove off, Emlyn took a look at the crimson moon which was hanging silently in the sky. His mind gradually calmed, as he couldn't help but recall everything that happened that very day. From that, he concluded lessons and gained experience. Finally, he began counting how many Bay underpowers he needed to record on Tulemanos' travels. I used all of the 5 lightning strikes, 1 teleportation, 1 door opening, 1 astromancy, a total of 8 times. In addition to that, I need to pay 2 additional powers, making it 10. This will be a little difficult. There are some Bay underpowers that probably can't be recorded. For example, my self-recovery powers. I can only repeat them. After I obtain the Ancestor's Ring, I can try recording the Bay underpowers it possesses, Lilith's Ring. Above the gray fog in the palace that looked like a giant's residence, Klein sat in the high-backed chair belonging to the fool as he quietly pondered over Emlyn White's prayer. He had originally imagined that he would be woken up in the middle of the night, having to provide a particular inexperienced vampire help. But to his surprise, Emlyn had finished everything by 11 and had even submitted the mission in. Back then, Emlyn prayed to the fool because of a revelation from the ancient god Lilith. Now, he has received her ring. Regardless of who Lilith is, I need to be wary and observe. Klein seriously contemplated for a few seconds before replying to Emlyn's prayer in a staid manner. When praying to me or participating in the gathering in the future, take off that ring. After giving his instructions, Klein returned to the real world. Without worrying about being woken up in the middle of the night, he slept till daybreak. After breakfast and taking a rest, it was time for his etiquette lessons with Wahana. It was a special lesson for the ball he was hosting at his residence on the weekend. Wahana's soft black hair flowed as the ends of her dress twirled, while she led Dwayne Dantes into familiarizing himself with the opening dance. In the brisk and comforting music, this etiquette teacher suddenly said, "I heard Ma'am Mary visited you yesterday afternoon." Yes. As Klein poignantly reflected on how there weren't any secrets in the world of social networks, he nodded frankly. Wahana nodded gently and said after 2 seconds of silence, "I heard that Ma'am Mary has pledged all her shares to the bank to borrow a large sum of money. This is a warning for me to be careful, so that I wouldn't fall into a scam. The help I previously provided had not only allowed me to quickly enter the social circles in Buckland Street, but it has also continuously brought me benefits. However, Ma'am Mary's pledging of shares was to secretly acquire more shares." Klein listened in silence before revealing a warm smile. "Thank you." He paused and added, "I believe in the character of every friend, but in the field of business, caution is forever the first principle. I have already gotten Walter to hire an independent lawyer and accounting team to perform the due diligence and come up with a proposal that can protect my interests and avoid taxes in the best way possible. Before that, I won't make any decision." Wahana raised her head a little and looked into Dwayne Dantes' deep blue eyes before suddenly sighing with a laugh. "You truly are a wise person." Klein originally wanted to attribute it to maturity, but thinking back to how Wahana's husband had previously been in a scam over his cloth, and he had only managed to reduce his losses thanks to him, such an answer easily made her imagine things and make comparisons. Since it would appear like a mockery, he changed his excuse and said with a chuckle, "My wisdom comes from the lessons I've received in the past. It's hard to imagine you being duped." Wahana chuckled as she lowered her head. "Is it due to all your experiences that you can appreciate the different kinds of charms for all kinds of ladies?" "When is this rumor ever going to end?" Klein said with a helpless smile. "Every flower has something beautiful about it." After familiarizing himself with the entire process and the corresponding dance, Klein walked Wahana out. Together with his valet, Richardson, he took up Ma'am Mary's invitation and headed for the coin company in Sherwood Borough. On Sherwood Borough, outside the coin company, when Klein alighted from the carriage, he looked around as if he had never been here before, as though everything had a strong sense of novelty. In fact, he wasn't a stranger to the area. He knew that opposite the street was the Gardely department store where the middle class enjoyed patronizing, and that there was a shop not far away that was famous for its specialty desi pie. He had once spent a considerable amount of time here waiting for Dorago Gale to tail him so as to obtain evidence to his acts of adultery. Retracting his gaze, Klein walked towards the coin company with Richardson. Ma'am Mary and her lady's maid were already waiting there. In the relatively conservative Loan Kingdom, a lady servant had to be of the same sex, otherwise it would result in nasty gossip, affecting her social relationships and marriage. Therefore, even though Ma'am Mary's lady's maid needed to play the role of her secretary to a certain extent, with her understanding societal etiquette, commercial knowledge, and having a certain level of negotiation skill, all she could do was select from women with good education or with relevant working experience without considering any men. Similarly, gentlemen needed to have valets and commercial secretaries of the same sex. Of course, even so, there were always people who couldn't rein themselves in and engaged in immoral acts. Every year there were cases of servants and their employers having relations. Amongst them, the maids were mostly the victims. They were either cheated, forced, or enticed to become the male employer's lover. When they were eventually discovered, they would be fired, losing their jobs. Then their reputation would be destroyed, making them ineligible options for servants again. Many a time, they had to become prostitutes. "Good afternoon, Dwayne." Ma'am Mary welcomed him with a smile. Klein bowed and said, "Good afternoon, ma'am." It really is a flourishing area. Such a topic was roughly equivalent to talking about the weather. After Mary exchanged pleasantries with him, she led Dwayne Dantes through the coin company's entrance and said with a smile, "Later, there will be professionals giving you an explanation as they show you around." After about half an hour, hit on up. I've prepared a buffet and invited a few friends in different circles. Friends in different circles. This is her trying to expand my social circle, very sincere. Klein nodded slightly and said, "As someone not from the area, I always look forward to knowing more friends, having just come to Backland." "No, you're nothing like that. If I had the liberty of saying it, you're a true Backland gentleman who has received excellent education," Ma'am Mary replied politely. As they conversed, they passed through the door and entered the reception area, which had excellent lighting. A stocky man in a suit with a beautiful mustache stood there waiting. "This is Luke Sammer. He is our coin company's first manager." Mary introduced him to Dwayne Dante. "Actually, I know him." Klein looked at Luke and nodded with a smile. To him, Luke Sammer was a rather staid, professional gentleman. He enjoyed machinery and was a very gentlemanly person at banquets. He didn't belittle the poor detective who had yet to make a name for himself. Not did he deliberately curry favor with the few mid-ranking civil servants of the Backland Municipal Department that lived on Mint Street. "This is my friend, Dwayne Dante. He's interested in anthracite and high-quality charcoal. Help me give him a detailed explanation," Mary said to Luke. Luke, who had been informed ahead of time, took a step forward and looked at the tycoon from Daisy Bay. He gave a warm smile and said respectfully, "Mr. Dentes, this is the coin company's headquarters. We have long-term agreements with several anthracite mines. We supply Sherwood, Hillston, North and West Borough with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, satisfying 30% of their overall demand. We also have the chance of clinching a huge contract with the Navy." I've never seen Luke with such an expression. Klein followed him around coin company with an unperturbed expression as he listened to Luke introduce the various areas. From time to time, he would inquire without expressing his attitude. Half an hour later, they went up to the second floor and entered a huge meeting room. The place was already set up, with tables clinging close to the wall. Plates of food were randomly placed on them, with mainly ham, smoked meat, sausages, bread, salad, cakes, pudding, and other cold dishes. However, there were a few hot dishes. Just as he stepped in, Dwayne Dentes was introduced to two men who were talking close to Mary. "This is reporter Mike Joseph from the Daily Observer. This is an excellent surgeon, Dr. Aaron Seary. In Backland, you will often need them." As Klein listened to Mary, he smiled at the two gentlemen, the corners of his lips nearly twitching. "These are all friends I'm very familiar with. Well, I'm even more familiar with the fetus in the womb of Aaron's wife." "Why does that sound wrong?" as Klein lampooned. He patiently waited for Mary to introduce Dwayne Dantes to the two men before politely greeting Mike and Aaron. Mike Joseph didn't look much different from last year. He had thin brows, rough skin, and charming blue eyes. As for Aaron Series, although he was intrinsically a cold and reserved person, he didn't make it obvious. Everything that happened in the recent half-year had been smooth for him. In terms of mood and confidence, he was riding a high. Upon hearing that Dantes was a tycoon from Daisy, Mike took out his name card and handed it over with a smile. "You don't mind me advertising, right? TF you wish to publish and find me. Be it the Daily Observer or the Tussock Times, I can provide you with a discounted price." As he spoke, Mike winked, indicating that he was joking. "You are nothing but a reporter with all these fake identification documents. Why didn't you mention the discount price to Sherlock Moriarty in the past? You were looking down on the detective, were you?" Klein lampooned and exchanged name cards with him. "T have always had such needs." Following that, he turned to Aaron and handed another name card to him. "T was recently ill and recovered only recently. I'm very aware of how important a doctor is. T a surgeon, so I believe you wouldn't wish to meet me that much." Despite saying so, Aaron still received the name card. "No, I'd love to meet you. I even wish to join the party of your child's birth," Klein mumbled, deliberately leading the conversation to the field of medicine and having a good conversation with Mike and Aaron. He had previously been stressing over how to close ties with Aaron to reestablish connections with a particular unborn fetus. After all, the paper crane was about to tear at any moment, making it unusable for even one more attempt. As for Sherlock Moriarty, it was difficult for him to openly appear in Backland to pay Aaron a visit, much less participate in the birth party. "There aren't any problems now. With Ma'am Mary's introduction, I can very naturally get close to Aaron. When the time comes, I'll definitely be invited. I might even be made the godfather of a particular snake of Mercury. After all, we are all believers of the goddess. Will this make a particular fetus angry? Better be careful." "I definitely wouldn't mention this unless Aaron mentions it," Klein thought in delight. He skillfully held himself back without appearing overly passionate on their first meeting. After a simple chat, he was introduced to the other guests by Mary. During this process, Klein didn't forget to get some food and water, making him appear to easily adapt himself to the environment. After completing a round, Mary stopped and said after some deliberation, "Everyone here is my friend. This means that you didn't invite anyone from the other camp, and you are also including me as your friend." Klein nodded gently. "T probably shouldn't ask as a gentleman, but as a businessman, I need to know who is the person, or who are the people, vying for the coin company's controlling share rights." Mary fell silent for 2 seconds. "Baron Sindras and his friend. They wish to publicly list the coin company and earn the sky-high evaluation that will eventually happen. They're completely unconcerned with the company's future development. Baron Sindras, one of the richest men in Lone. By donating to the Conservative Party, he became an aristocrat and is a banker, factory owner, and a powerful businessman. It's hard to tell where he stands. So even though he relied on the Conservative Party to obtain his aristocratic title, he's more aligned with the new party while being biased towards merchants," Klein thought and asked with a smile. "Why didn't you get that Mr. Hall to help? His father is a powerful noble and banker. He should be able to provide you with the necessary help." Mary said with a wry smile, "Mr. Hall doesn't wish to involve himself in this matter. He claims to be the chief secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, so he can't be involved in commercial activities that deal with anthracite or charcoal. A man whose true ambitions lie in politics, however, he probably doesn't wish to be at odds with Baron Sindras. Heh. If I were to choose another butler back then, I'd likely have established ties with Baron Sindras. He's so rich. So if he really wants to raise the price, I wouldn't be able to beat him. Will a trope of him using money to crush me appear?" Klein didn't ask further as he said, "I will wait for the investigation report." Realizing that Dwayne Dantes wasn't directly backing out, Mary said with slight gratitude, "In this age, chivalrous people are already few and far between. You are one of them." Klein smiled without promising anything. After the buffet was over, he began returning to Northborough on his high-end four-wheeled carriage. As he daydreamed while looking out the window, Klein suddenly said to Richardson, "Turn toward St. Samuel Cathedral." He had failed to figure out the exact answer to the reason for the anomaly in the cathedral, which was later quelled. This made him wonder if he should find a chance to make contact with the keeper. He also remembered that every afternoon, there would at least be a keeper who prayed to the goddess in the prayer hall. How should I make contact? In that environment, even a conversation will appear noisy, and this will easily incur the suspicion of others. Klein frowned slightly as he decided to observe before coming up with a solution. The carriage didn't change direction as it continued driving towards Bauckland Street, but it didn't stop and instead continued past it. Inside the carriage, Klein closed his eyes to calm his slightly anxious feelings. Northborough, St. Samuel Cathedral. Just as Klein entered the main prayer hall, he used the points of light that shone from the back of the altar to survey his surroundings, taking in all the believers inside. In one glance, Klein rapidly locked onto a target. He followed the aisle and walked forward without showing any abnormal sign. In the first row was an elder wearing a black clergyman's robe, but he exuded a cold aura. His face was pale, and his hair was withered and yellow. He had his eyes closed tightly as he prayed with great focus. He was one of the keepers that Klein had previously sensed. His shift is usually on Friday. Klein didn't approach him and instead sat 2 pews away from it. After finding a spot to sit down, he handed over his hat and cane to Richardson. Then, while sitting down, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, silently activating his spirit-body thread's vision. Suddenly, black illusory threads appeared in front of Klein, as they densely extended out of different spirit bodies endlessly. Having just taken his seat, Klein shifted his gaze, casting it onto the keeper. He nearly exclaimed from what he saw, but thanks to his self-control as a clown, and his ability to expect abnormal situations, he managed to relax and maintain his staid attitude. In his vision, although the yellow-haired elder had spirit body threads extending out, his body was entirely black in color on the inside, as the darkness swallowed the origins of the illusory threads in a way that was completely different from ordinary bayonders. Indeed, they have already been eroded by the core seal, causing a mutation at the level of the soul. From the looks of it, the problem is closer to my second guess. They are, in a sense, part of the core seal. Once they show signs of losing control, they will immediately trigger the item's instinctive reaction that forcefully quells them. It's no wonder the keepers need to be a voluntary role and be advanced in their years. They probably understand the outcome. Klein sighed as he prepared to deactivate his spirit-body thread senses and retract his gaze. At this moment he saw a pair of eyes. They were black without any emotions within. Beside the eyes, there were pronounced wrinkles that extended bit by bit, as though they were distorted, strange, mysterious symbols. They were the keeper's eyes. At some point in time, he had straightened his body, turned around and looked blankly at Dwayne Dantes. Klein's scalp instantly went numb as he forced a smile, and nodded at him as though it was a normal meeting of eyes. The keeper slowly moved his head as a response. Then Klein felt as though he was extracted from his surroundings, as things turned blurry before turning clear. At that instant, he knew that he had been pulled into a dream. Hence, as he maintained his image as Dwayne Dantes, he sized up his surroundings, only to realize that he was still inside St. Samuel Cathedral. However, all the pews were either damaged or overturned and strewn everywhere. It looked as though it had met with a raid. The altar up ahead was filled with cracks and weeds. The thick layer of dust made it seem like it had been in such desolate conditions since a long time ago. The keeper with yellow, withered hair was in front of the collapsed donation box, coldly staring at Dwayne Dantes, who was suited in black. Upon seeing Klein look over, he widened his mouth to reveal white, sharp, irregular teeth. And these teeth were embedded with blurry, indistinct and tiny figures. They had complete facial features and limbs, and their expressions were different but were colored with the same pain, as though they were imprisoned there and unable to escape. Grunt. The keeper's throat let out a growl that sounded like a beast as his back hunched over. His spine and waist, his clothes swelled as 4 blood vessel-covered arms without any skin grew out. Right on the heels of that, they grew fine black hair as the tips of his fingers grew sharp nails with a smacking sound. In just 3 short seconds, the keeper who looked normal had turned into an 8-legged monster that sprawled on the ground. It looked like a spider that had silently woven its web in the night while awaiting its prey, and also like a deformed black wolf that struck intense fear into one's heart. Meanwhile, 2 gigantic palms filled with black hair extended out of the desolate altar without any warning. They pressed onto the sides as black gas condensed into slippery tentacle that extended in every direction. Soon they filled the entire prayer hall. The aura that left him trembling, the extreme sense of fear, and the huge, illusory figure were penetrating an invisible barrier as they manifested more clearly. He lost control. That keeper lost control. Klein stood there, subconsciously wishing to react and use his uniqueness to forcibly escape the dream, but suddenly, he figured out the series of events that had happened. His expression changed as he wore a terrified expression as he ran to the door, trembling. It looked like he was struggling in a dream, In the time it took to take a breath, a dark chill spread out from the outside world like a tidal wave, inundating the entire dream and quelling everything. Klein snapped his eyes open and realized that he had fallen asleep at some point in time. As for the yellow-haired keeper, he had long turned his head to continue praying. Wayne Dentaise's eyes darted around as he looked around in horror, as though he was still immersed in the dream, and unable to escape the horror that had gripped him. After nearly a minute, he took 2 deep breaths and looked at the sacred emblem again, drawing a sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Only then did Klein have the time to recall the experience he had, and began speculating as to what had happened. As I had spied on his spirit-body threads, it caused him to show signs of losing control, thus causing an excessive reaction by pulling me into a dream and attempting to deal with me. Later, the core seal behind Channy's gate sensed the anomaly and quelled the problem. Now, the crux of the matter is if the keeper still remembers the source of his near mutation. If he's already used to it, he should find the cause of the problem very vague, considering his present state. Of course, it might not be my problem. Perhaps he was already on the brink of losing control. Klein looked at the elder once again to observe what he would do next to determine how he should react. If all else fails, I'll directly use creeping hunger and escape with traveling. Klein rapidly made up his mind as he patiently waited for the possible repercussion. A few minutes later, he saw Bishop Electra walk in from the side door towards him. Klein's heart tightened as he spread open his left fingers in preparation to activate creeping hunger. At that moment, he suddenly had an idea and stopped his action. If the keeper has already informed the bishops about my problematic situation via a dream, I would be the victim of a collective assault by the church's beyonders. After all, pulling me into a dream can avoid harming the other believers. Therefore, they have no need to find a bishop I'm familiar with to come over. It's likely more to extend their regards and to placate me. Klein retracted his gaze and continued a praying pose. In less than a minute, he finally sensed someone approach as he looked up and saw Bishop Electra softly say, "You don't look too well." T fell asleep without realizing it and had a nightmare. "I still feel a little afraid," Klein said with a self-deprecating smile. Bishop Electra sat beside him and said in a staid manner, "Dreams are sometimes the manifestation of the fear within you. You will feel better as long as you sincerely pray to the goddess and consume holy water. Of course, the most important thing is to not suppress yourself usually. Learn to confess to the goddess. At times, wailing in secret can reduce a lot of your stress." Klein secretly observed the bishop's attitude and read his tone before heaving a sigh of relief. "It understand." He cast his gaze forward again, bowed his head, and clasped his hands to begin praying silently. While doing so, he saw the keeper in front of him stand up and walk to the side door where a bishop was waiting. Phew, Klein silently exhaled as he truly became one with the serene environment. Suddenly, he heard a voice that was his, but it wasn't something that he could control. "Did you think what you did was well hidden?" "No, not at all. Have you forgotten that you've touched the Evernight Goddess's holy artifact?" Becoming better, who is it? Who is the one speaking? Klein's muscles tensed up as he nearly opened his eye. At that moment, his back oozed with sweat that soaked his shirt. What he was most alarmed of wasn't the words said, but that it directly sounded in his heart and had modulated the voice to sound exactly like his. Although I maintained my lucidity in that dream, I still had my spirit body tainted by his psyche that was on the verge of losing control. Or is someone using that keeper to pass me a message? Countless guesses ran through Klein's mind. Finally, combining the contents of what was said and his own situation, he came up with a preliminary judgment. The number of people who knows about my identity as Klein Morty is few to begin with. Likewise for those who know that Klein Morty had once sworn an oath while touching a holy artifact. Furthermore, there's almost no intersection between the two. Mr. Azek had heard me mention the former matter before, but if he wants to give me any reminders, he can directly do it through a messenger. There's no need to use such a frightening method. Will Ossipton might know, after all, he's a snake of Mercury who represents fate. But by the same logic, he can directly contact me, of course. I can eliminate the possibility that he suddenly had the thought of frightening me. I just thought in the afternoon about having a chance of becoming his godfather. The Antigonus family's notebook had corrupted the keeper, just like how it used the misfortune cloth puppet to deliver the symbol. But if it really is the Antigonus family's notebook, why didn't it just give me the potion formula directly? Or try negotiating with me to help in a notebook jailbreak, St. Samuel Cathedral is the headquarters of the Backland Diocese, making it at a higher level than St. Selena Cathedral. That notebook shouldn't have the ability to do anything further. It should be securely sealed. Apart from them, there is only one entity who is aware of both matters, the Evernight Goddess. However, with a deity's pride, she has no need to pretend to act as a passerby to call me out with a polite and a strange tone. I'm in St. Samuel Cathedral, so all she needs to do is produce a revelation, and dozens of Beyonders will appear to mow me down. And as a diocese headquarters with sufficient preparation, they can probably disrupt traveling. Therefore, there's no need to go through so much trouble. There's still one more person who's aware of both matters, that's myself. Before planning my operation, I've actually considered the corresponding problem. Back then, my conclusion was that I didn't need to worry too much about it, because only after advancing to faceless will some of the gray fog's powers enter the real world, allowing certain demigods to sense my uniqueness. Before this, only Beyonders from the monster pathway could discover a tiny bit of my uniqueness, and back when I touched the holy sword and made that oath, I had yet to become a clown, just because of the secret connection established from the oath. It made the goddess slowly sense something about me. It's been so long and I haven't seen her take any action. That female angel, she should be an angel. She had even smiled at me when she wiped away Mr. A. Therefore, the goddess might be happy to see me take away the Antigonus family's note. Although I'm not sure of her motives, I can only accept it and subsequently think of ways to deal with it at my current level. This is ultimately safer than climbing the main peak of the Hornisus mountain range. Of course, that's built on the premise that the lady which wiped away Mr. A is an angel of the church. Although I had undergone all kinds of acting during the faceless stage and got to know myself well, I've consumed additional potions without completely digesting them. And marionettist requires every marionette to adhere to a specific persona. This also easily causes a personality dissociation. Also, to steal the Antigonus family's notebook and to act as Dwayne Dantes, I'm under immense stress. I'm subconsciously wavering and am suspicious. In this state, the keeper's corrupted psyche of nearly losing control had agitated my spirit body, causing me to have a split personality. Just as Klein thought of this, the familiar yet unfamiliar voice resounded in his mind again. Your considerations are too idealized. All of your actions are fundamentally all thanks to luck. If that high-ranking deacon, Crestet Sesamir, with the Holy Sword was here in Backland to handle Beyonder cases, can you guarantee that the Holy Sword wouldn't sense you when you are in the same cathedral? Both of you are linked by an oath. If Deacon Sesamir were to come, I'll abandon this plan. Besides, it's also not possible to avoid it ahead of time. I'll find an excuse or reason to be out of town for some time, Klein mumbled inwardly. Then he heard the voice belonging to himself sound in his mind. This makes it a situation prone to too many accidents and unpredictable developments. Before coming to the cathedral, didn't you also not consider that the mere observation of spirit-body threads would result in a mutation? My nervousness back then was the anxiety that something happened beyond my expectation. However, as it's a mere observation without me making any direct contact, I didn't believe that there would be too great a problem. I should be more cautious in the future. Also, accidents and developments exist for everything. Who exactly are you? Klein closed his eyes as he pretended to focus on praying. The voice hesitated and said, I'm Klein. You are Joe Mingrui. No, I'm Joe Mingrui. You are Klein. Indeed, Klein felt his hair stand on end once again. He decided to leave St. Samuel Cathedral immediately, return home, and resolve the problem of his character dissociation. When the symptoms first appear, the situation is easier to resolve. Once the other personality stabilizes and becomes stronger, it will begin to snatch control of the body. I might even need external help when that happens. He opened his eyes and looked at Electra with a tranquil expression. Feel like I've calmed down. Ever since I got a mental illness, my mind is a lot better. As he spoke, Klein inwardly gave a self-deprecating comment. He enjoyed lampooning, partially because it was in his character to do so, and partially to enforce his personality. It was ultimately to remind himself who he was, so as not to lose himself to his act. Bishop Electra smiled. May the goddess bless you. As he spoke, he took a cup of water from a priest's hand and passed it to Dwayne Dante. Without any explanation needed, Klein knew that it was holy water. He often drank it in the past, hence, hiding his anxiety, he received it in a composed manner and downed it. A refreshing feeling slushed down his throat, jolting his mind as he became a lot more awake. Even the voice in his mind weakened. This has the effect of placating the spirit body. The church does view Dwayne Dantes with great importance. Of course, this is created by their Beyonders. As Klein nodded at Bishop Electra, he drew the sign of the Crimson Moon and staidly walked to the altar and donated £50 into the donation box. After doing everything, he led Richardson and left the cathedral, riding the carriage back to Buckland Street. On his trip back, he didn't feed the pigeons, because an ordinary person who had just encountered something would hardly have the peace of mind to do so. After returning home, the silent Klein used the excuse of an afternoon nap to dismiss his servant. In his master bedroom's bathroom, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the gray fog. Passing through the roars and ravings, he didn't feel his body be purified. He was increasingly certain that the voice in his mind originated from himself. It was a result of being corrupted and agitated, causing a character dissociation. Sitting in the high-back chair of the fool, Klein immediately studied his spirit-body situation. He discovered that there were some signs of chaos without it being pure. The corresponding auric colors were somewhat spotted. After seriously contemplating for 2 minutes and ignoring the echoing noise in his head, Klein conjured the world jam and sparrow and made him devoutly pray. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform the moon that I wish to rent the mental terror candle for half a day." I know he has the means of obtaining it. Very early on, his identity as the world had been prepared for Sherlock Moriarty, so Klein wasn't worried about it. South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Lynn White, who was anticipating his obtaining of Lilith's ring in the evening, suddenly saw the endless gray fog and heard the whirl. Alarmed, he muttered in silence, "How does he know that I can get the mental terror candle?"